So hello and welcome to the China Masterclass webinar. My name is Paul Sutton. I'm one of the co-founders of LCN Legal, which specializes in helping multinational groups. I'm joined by my co-host, Sally Meyer-Yip, who is an expert in PR. And I'm delighted today to have as our special guest, Patrick Tsang, who is the chairman of Tsangs Group. And I'll let Sally give a much better introduction to Patrick in a little bit, but I'm sure he'll be able to share some really interesting insights about his own family office in Hong Kong and the way that he links Western corporates with China and vice versa. But first of all, in case you haven't come across the China Masterclass webinar before, just a couple of minutes by way of introduction. So the focus of this webinar series is very much about long-term trust, value, and relationships in China. And on each webinar, we invite a guest like Patrick, who is an expert or a specialist or has particular experience in that particular area, with the aim of sharing actionable insights for you, the viewer, in relation to your business or businesses. So with that, I'll hand over to Sam to set the scene.
And thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us in Hong Kong today. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you as our special guest for the China Masterclass webinar. Just to briefly introduce Patrick, I think I know Patrick for a few years, and then we connect recently. So Patrick is a real pioneer in business in many aspects. Patrick is a global citizen, as very seasoned investor and an excellent public speaker. So among all the amazing things Patrick is doing, Patrick is the chairman of Tsangs Group with a headquarter office in Hong Kong, as well as offices in London and Shenzhen. Patrick leads and drives different investment in Tsangs Group across different sectors, mainly to connect the rest of the world to China. So personally, I find Patrick has this amazing energy and drive for progress every day, every hour, if not every second, which is very inspiring to see. So today webinar is really about inside the mind of a Hong Kong family office and seasoned investor. And I have a great pleasure to kick off this session with my first question to Patrick. I know that your life motto is anything is possible, and you recently launched Anything is Possible interview series with different leaders worldwide. So could you tell us how this ethos, Anything is Possible, came about, and what do you want to achieve through your newly launched interview series? Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me. It's my honor and pleasure and privilege to be with you and to hopefully share some mistakes and failures that I've made in the past. Anything is possible is a life motto of mine. I've always been very, from a young age, from growing up in the UK and in Northern Ireland, I experienced a lot of bullying in the first couple of years at school. I was the only ethnically Chinese kid at school. I was bullied every day. I was in a lot of fights and so on. And from a young age, I always faced a lot of hostility and glass ceilings. And I've always wanted to prove to people, anyone, that I'm just as able, if not better, than what you're doing and so on. So I was a very competitive child, and I always believed that anything is possible if you put your mind to it. And last year, I've been working on a book called Anything is Possible, where I talk about stories and lessons that mistakes that I've made in the past to try and pass on and share with people. And recently, obviously in 2020, there's been a lot of turbulence and disruptive times during this year because of COVID-19. And during this difficult time of COVID-19, I've had a lot of time off where just to give you a bit of background, in April 2020, I decided to do hip surgery. I had a problem with a labral tear in my hip. So I took some time off to do the surgery and recuperating. And during this recuperation time, I managed to rest more, to reevaluate what I'm doing. And at the same time, I attended a lot of speaking opportunities in different webinars from finance to China to technology and so on. And during this time, many people, including young people, have been asking me for advice as to how they should navigate this current challenging pandemic. And as a result of this, I felt a lot of negative energy from especially the younger people. So I created this Anything is Possible web series to try and do a few things. The mission of AIP, Anything is Possible, is to 1, share positivity. 2 is to overcome challenges. 3 is to create one world together, which means that we want to eradicate all kinds of divide. And especially recently, we've seen in the US-China trade war, different kind of political events all across the globe, which is dividing, people of different nations, of different cities, of different families even. And we hope to try to use this series where I interview in a casual setting of 60 minutes of global leaders and influencers, where I ask them specific questions like how they've dealt with the COVID situation, how they've learned from their past failures, what's their number one advice that they would share with their fans, their audience, especially the younger people. So I took this opportunity to create the series that we're heavily marketing in LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook to show to the world that, COVID is not the end of the world. COVID-19 is a small blockage of a long life that we all have, and we have to learn from it. Anything that doesn't kill us makes us stronger. We've heard the phrase, we've heard the song, and obviously it's a bit of a cliche, but at the same time, every single event, especially if there's a negative tone to it, it's fine. As long as we learn from it and not make the same mistake, we've all gained from the experience, and we should all try and live in the moment. So, anything is possible.
Wow, that's truly fascinating, and we need more people like you in the world to make the world better. Thank you. And now we hand over to Paul to ask the second question, please.
Yeah, so Patrick, as I understand it, one of the areas of focus of your group is to help Western companies to crack China, so really break into the China market. So my question is, what's your approach in doing that? What do you look for in terms of which companies you can help and which maybe you can't help? And what is your process around that?
Thank you, Paul. So the question is, how do we, Tsangs Group, approach tackling entering the Chinese market, and how we would, share some of our insight and thoughts with Western companies trying to crack the China market? So obviously, we know that China is, like, after the US, it's the biggest market, it's the biggest consumer market. And in the not distant future, the Chinese market will overtake all the other markets globally. So even though we have a big US-China trade war and a lot of different kind of geopolitical events that have stopped China from growing somewhat, we have to understand there's a lot of interest from the US and the European side that they still want the Chinese market. So what does Tsangs Group, our family office, do? We do 2 things mainly. One is we invest into early stage ventures where we invest and we try to take the companies public in Hong Kong, in London, and in New York. The second part of the business, what we do is we do a lot of strategic advisory where we help Chinese companies go overseas to the West. And then we also help Western companies enter the Chinese market. So going back to your question, how do we do this? Tsangs Group, our tagline is think global, be local. What do we mean by that? Think global means that we need to have a global perspective. The world is a very large place, but at the same time, it's very small now because of the internet, computers, the way we communicate. It's a very small world. We're all created almost equal, in my opinion. And as a result, we should all see that there's a global market out there. However, having said all that, we have to really think global. In Chinese, we have a phrase, Sally would know this, is that the local worm is stronger than, the big tiger. What does it mean? It means that you have to know what the local culture is. You have to understand what the local guys do. And then once you know that, you try to adapt your global strategy, your global perspective into the local scene. Let me give you a few more examples. For example, most Western companies that enter China, a lot of them are not successful. We've seen a lot of companies which have been very, very successful in the West, from Google to Facebook to different things, that have not been successful, probably because of political reasons, that these kind of like big tech companies, they're under a lot of like restrictive natures from the Chinese government, that they're not able to operate. But there are some key examples. For example, Microsoft, Apple, and Coca-Cola, of course, are very big American and multinational companies. They've succeeded in China, but it took them a long time. I'll give you a bit of an example. For example, Microsoft. It took Bill Gates and Microsoft like 14 years to be able to crack China. And the main problem was this. At the beginning, what they did was they tried to charge the same price as they were charging in America and Europe for their software. But we all know in the early stage, when China was opening up to the world, there was still a lot of counterfeit and illegal piracy that was happening, whereby people in China it was a 95%, I think, market in China of Microsoft. It was bigger than Linux and Apple. But what Bill Gates did and his team did well was they hired 1 or 2 local guys to start up and to conquer China. Secondly is Microsoft adapted their business model by not charging the same price as they do and did in America and Europe. Instead, they lowered the prices that they charged each individual Microsoft user for the software in China. And that made everyone stick. The stickiness of Chinese people using Microsoft in every single PC, device, and so on, made Microsoft the strongest player in the software, which means that they did much less work later to try and hold on to the customer. Because by that time, the Chinese person, the Chinese user continuing to use Microsoft, they had already embedded every single user in China to use Microsoft. My advice to Western companies entering the Chinese market is to, 1, find a local partner that you can trust, not only in ability, but also in the integrity of the person or the company in which you can trust to help you handhold your business in China. Secondly, what you also need to do is you need to adapt your model that you've been successful maybe in the US or Europe, and you have to change it and adapt it to the way Chinese consumers and also how the Chinese government allow you to help. Now, going back to the Microsoft example, Microsoft also had very deep pockets. And during this deep pockets situation, they were able to hire a lot of very influential American consultants. In this particular case, they were able to hire Henry Kissinger as a consultant to help Microsoft open up a lot of doors in China, including to meet the then president and premier of China.
And can I just ask, so in relation to that scenario, you're helping a Western group to break into China. How do you structure your involvement from a Tsangs Group perspective? Is it a purely advisory capacity, or do you co-invest in the structure? In which case, how are you structuring that co-investment?
Thank you, Paul. So the question is asking me, how do we structure and get involved in a Western company going into China? What we typically do is, it's not about just being an advisor or consultant to a tech company in the UK, for instance, and trying to crack the Chinese market. First of all, we have to do the due diligence, and we have to really like the business and the business model. But more importantly, apart from the whole China model, what Tsangs Group does is that we have to enjoy working with the team. And most importantly, we have to trust the management team. And are these guys the right team to lead the project? If we believe that they have the grit and determination to be able to succeed and evolve as the whole process goes along, then we either co-invest, or sometimes we just have advisory capacity. But in order for us to align the interests, to make it very incentivized for all parties concerned, including us, we then, as an equity participant in the project, in the company, moving forward into the Chinese market, that gives us significant incentive to grow and continue the journey to handhold and to add value to these companies. So not only do we invest, we also bring in the Tsangs Group global connections of network of investors, of partners, of advisors, of government connections we have worldwide and try to add value and make it a 1 + 1 = 10 scenario for, the target company going into China.
Sure. Okay, thank you. And when you're working in the other direction, so when you're working with Chinese corporates, and as I understand it, you help them make acquisitions overseas, what's the value add that you provide there? Because, obviously so much information is available online in terms of potential acquisition targets and so on. Where's the specific value add that you provide in that scenario?
What is the value that Tsangs Group provide to the Chinese company going west? Now, first of all, the biggest problem I see is that there's a depth and wealth of knowledge out there. Everyone can Google and find out different information. But in this day and age, the key to all this is not an information age. What we need is to be able to extrapolate the right data and to use the data correctly in the right manner in order to get the maximum value and efficiency from it. So you can get all the data you have. We can look at all the medical science books or whatever. We can look at all the medical science and books and so on. It does not mean that myself, Sally, Paul, you can be able to use that data correctly because we're not qualified physicians or doctors. The second point is, in this current day and age, the biggest problem of doing global business is the lack of cultural understanding, the lack of the difference in the cultures. And actually, in my opinion, we are all quite similar. Whether you are white, black, yellow, orange, blue, purple, whatever color you may be, if we all cut our arms, we all bleed red, we all share similar traits and values. We all want a better lives for our families, for our friends, for our loved ones, better education, sanitation, a clean home, shelter, safety. What we've seen recently between the US and China, the European countries and China, is that the Western world, they use a lot of Western glasses or Western thinking and they shift that emphasis into the Chinese counterparty and think, why are these guys doing things differently? And on the other side of the spectrum, what we see is the Chinese government, the Chinese people, they use what the Chinese think is correct onto the Western part. And it just doesn't work because we're different animals in that respect. What we need to do is to have more self-respect for each other and one another, and the world will be a much better place. Now, let's try and translate that into a business perspective. If we look at most of the successful Chinese companies, like the massive companies we're talking about in terms of Tencent, Alibaba, JD.com, all these big companies, these are all Chinese companies making a lot of money in China. They are listed on overseas markets such as Hong Kong and the US, but they're not really making money from the Western or the European markets. They're still making money from the Chinese people. So they're still very Chinese-centric. So in the past, for example, WeChat, they did a big Messi campaign where they got Lionel Messi as ambassador. They tried to spread WeChat to Turkey, Spain, France, all these different countries. WeChat never really took off in Europe or in North America. The only people, but we also have a lot of WeChat users in the UK, in the US, and various parts of the globe. And the reason for that is there's two groups of people using WeChat in this kind of environment. One is Chinese people living overseas. Two is for non-Chinese people who have Chinese friends or Chinese business. So they want to tap into the Chinese market. So they all download WeChat and tries to use WeChat. All the other companies, they all make money from China. And the thing is, they never really become global companies. Because what we haven't done, what we haven't really seen is that Western companies or Western people tend not to accept Chinese things or Chinese products or services. The only one or two exceptions that I can think of is TikTok. TikTok is a company which is originally China. It's a Chinese shareholder. And they've been super, super successful in the West, where they had a lot of downloads, a lot of sharing of short videos of young people in the West. And obviously TikTok now is facing a lot of geopolitical problems in that Trump and America is trying to stop TikTok from capitalizing on the big number of viewers and users that it has in the US. Interestingly enough, from the Western perspective, from the other side, we've seen also Western companies finding it difficult to enter the Chinese market. What Tsangs Group has is that, for example, myself, I've spent half of my life in the UK and the other half of my life in Asia, mainly in China. And these two coupled together, including also different languages that I speak, the way my brain is programmed, I can think and feel what a Western person thinks. I can also think how a Chinese or Asian thinks. And if you're able to close this gap between China and the West, then you're able to add value by connecting West to East. And it's easy saying, oh, you can Google it, you can find it online, and we have a lot of different people that try to do this. But what you need is a team of people that truly understands China and the West, and to have a global perspective. And if we're able to bridge this well, we're able to capitalize and add value. That's what Tsangs Group, our mission is.
And as someone with a Chinese mother-in-law, I can completely relate to the challenge of cultural understanding there. And personally, I think it's something really exciting over the coming 10 years or more, you know, the idea of Chinese brands truly becoming global, truly becoming accepted. I think it's such an exciting opportunity. So I'm going to hand over to Sally to ask the final question, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Patrick, for the fascinating principles on doing business between West and China. So I'm going to ask you something very close to my heart, which is about brand building in China. So imagine if you were advising a Western company with massive scale-up potential in China, what kind of PR or marketing advice would you give to them in the current context of recovery to of the COVID-19 world?
Thank you, Sally. So regarding advice, I need advice from you. You're the PR expert, but just to share with you some of my insight on China, the PR strategy in terms of COVID-19, is that what we've seen in the last 6 to 9 months is there's been a significant increase in the behavior of how people are acting, especially in China. For instance, people's use of social media has gone up like 20%. People playing games has gone up about 14%. People shopping online has gone up about 20%. And this is because of the pandemic, that people are staying at home, they're ordering more things online, delivery services have gone up. There's 3 or 4 things I want to highlight. One is, for example, a lot of the big brands, what they've done is they've shifted a lot of their campaigns online. For example, this year for Valentine's Day, Louis Vuitton closed down a lot of their physical shops. And what they did was they set up a virtual WeChat app store on Louis Vuitton, and they tried to get more engagement with the online peers. And as a result, their sales was almost double what they made from Valentine's Day in 2019.
Wow.
Second thing is we need to, what a lot of these activity wear kind of brands, for example, Nike, what they've done is during the pandemic, they've done a lot of engagement with online, where they're having a lot of classes where people can go on Zoom kind of conference webinar style. And they have 300 to 500,000 extra followers. They have a lot more people engaging in the physical interaction, even though it's all done virtually. So that's all been a big improvement. What we've seen from all this pandemic is that what these international companies have done really extremely well is that they've really adapted to the situation. My advice to companies that want to enter into China, you have to act very fast. You have to take action very fast and adapt to the situation. A place like Hong Kong and China, especially during this pandemic, we've seen every day there's changes to the environment, from wearing masks to dining in certain hours, what shops, what industries have been restricted. You have to be aware of your environment. You have to know when to take certain action. and when not to take certain action. So what we also need to do is you have to be more agile. You have to be able to produce new content and to upload the content as soon as possible and to make use of different online strategies. The KOL strategy in China now is probably, in my opinion, the #1 market in the world. And sometimes one thing that's quite interesting is that a lot of our Western counterparts, they don't really understand and see why this KOL business in China is so dominating. And it's totally, again, going back to my point before, it's all down to the culture. It's just the way Chinese people behave and operate. They just act differently. When they see an influencer buy or use a certain product or service, there's a big herd mentality situation where consumers follow the crowd. And if you're able to ride on this tide and hit the right trend, you can make a lot of money and create a lot of value. That's only my 2 cents.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Yes. Paul, do you want to summarize?
Yeah, thank you, Sally, and thank you so much, Patrick, for spending this time with us. Just some of the key points that I took from this short discussion. #1, your personal story, and thank you for sharing in terms of overcoming adversity, whether it's your tough childhood or your recent health issues. It's so important, I believe, for people to be open, authentic, vulnerable in order to make a change in the world. #2, some of the issues that I really picked up on is that the power of the local worm, a great saying there. And I guess that just translates into the classic thing of choosing the right local partners to help you wherever you're going, whether that's from China to the West or in the opposite direction. #3, just the universal thing of cultural understanding. We're all the same deep down, but on the surface we can have very different ways of expressing ourselves, and that can create very different effects in terms of how a message is actually received. And so the need to adapt, whether that's pricing or political communication or communication through social media or whatever. And then finally, a point that I took in terms of the specific objective of maximizing sales, maximizing the brand building activity, the need for speed, the need to actually understand the local environment in China and align PR activities and content with that absolutely on a day-to-day basis. And of course, that fantastic example that you gave of Louis Vuitton actually increasing, maybe doubling their Valentine's Day sales this year as compared to last year is a great inspiration for all of us. So thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you, the viewer, for watching that. All we would ask is 2 things. First of all, if you enjoyed this, then please do share it with people that you think might find it useful or inspiring as well. And secondly, if you have any suggestions as to other people like Patrick that we should reach out to, please do let us know. You can email us, and the email address is please, Sally?
Yes, it's China Masterclass at 11kconsulting.com.
Fantastic. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Patrick.
Thank you.